good morning to all the brothers and sisters in Christ in the Fort Collins Christian Church, as well as to anyone else who's joining us for this online worship service this morning. What we are doing at the Fort Collins Christian Church, if you are joining us, is we are going through the Gospel of John in 2020. We're going through section by section, diving really into detail so that we can understand what is being taught, but also so we can make application to our lives. This morning we are going to be in John chapter 12. Before we dive in there, though, I actually have a pop quiz with a couple of questions I'd like to ask you guys to start off this morning. The first one: if you could become any one of these five people, which would you choose? A, the richest businessman or businesswoman in the world. B, the most popular and attractive movie star in the world. C, the MVP of your favorite professional sports league. D, perhaps you don't want all that fame, but just living a comfortable life without any major money or health problems. Or E, an AIDS victim in Southern Africa. Which would you choose? Second question: if you could become any of these five people, which would you choose? The richest businessman or woman in the world who never becomes a follower of Jesus. The most popular and attractive movie star in the world who never becomes a follower of Jesus. C, the MVP of your favorite professional sports league who never becomes a follower of Jesus. D, living that comfortable life without major money or health problems, but never becoming a follower of Jesus. Or E, an AIDS victim in Southern Africa who becomes a follower of Jesus and remains one until death. Now, was the choice for the second question a difficult one for you? Be honest. I mean, we might know that the right answer was E, but at what cost? You know, these questions reveal, in one sense, that if we had Jesus, is there anything we would sell him for? You know, is being right with him worth all of Jeff Bezos's money? I think he's the richest man in the world right now. Is being right with Jesus worth all the fame and adoration of a movie star? Is being right with him worth all the success of a LeBron James or a Tom Brady? Or even is being right with him worth just giving up the comforts of life? In a second sense, if we do not have Jesus, what would we be willing to pay to gain him? Would it be worth going through the suffering of an AIDS victim to make it to heaven and be with Jesus forever? You know, both sides of that type of question are an indication of what Jesus is worth to you and to me. You know, the title of the lesson this morning is a question: what is Jesus worth to you? And we're going to examine that by answering two other questions. One, are you sold out? Or two, are you a sellout? Now let's go ahead and read John chapter 12, verses 1 through 11. It says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took out about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. Here in this section, we see an example of someone who is sold out, Mary. Nothing was too much for her to give up for Jesus. But we also see in this section an example of a sellout in Judas, meaning there was something out there that he would give up Jesus to have. And before we completely discredit the possibility of any of us being like Judas, because, well, that is Judas we're talking about here, we need to realize it is easier to become like Judas than we might think. And we're going to talk about some of what contributed to Judas becoming the sellout he became in our second point. But first, let's look at that question: are we sold out? Matthew 26, Mark 14, and here in John 12 are all parallel accounts of this incident. And we'll take a look at a little bit of each of these accounts during our study this morning in order to get a better overall picture of what was taking place. Here in John 12, we see that a dinner is being given to honor Jesus. And this is presumably to honor him because he had just raised Lazarus from the dead back in John 11. That's a good reason to honor somebody. But from Lazarus' family here, we see various forms of devotion and gratitude toward Jesus for what he had done. Martha, who was Lazarus' sister, is serving Jesus. Lazarus himself is having intimate fellowship with Jesus at the table. And then here comes Mary, Lazarus' other sister, with a gift. And both John and Mark's accounts explain why this bottle of perfume was worth so much money. They say it was pure nard. And see, the plant that this came from was only grown in the Himalayas at the time. This most likely was a very valuable family heirloom. All three accounts say that it was worth about 300 denarii, which was a year's wage. I mean, consider that. What do you make in a year? Even if you just made minimum wage in the state of Colorado working full time, that'd be almost $25,000 a year. That would be a fair equivalent for us to consider to what was taking place then. This was a year's wage for a common laborer back then. $25,000 essentially in our day and age. Would you spend that much to give Jesus a gift of gratitude for what he has done for you? Is that the level of devotion that we have toward him? Now, we might say, yeah, but he raised Lazarus from the dead. That was an extraordinary situation. Well, you know what? If you have been baptized into Christ, guess what? He's raised you from the dead also. Or have we forgotten how miraculous it is that we are even in Christ if we are? Here Mary gives us an example of someone whom nothing was more valuable to her than Jesus. And we're certainly going to highlight Mary's gift as we study this, but let's not overlook the devotion of Martha and Lazarus. Martha's gratitude overflowed in service to Jesus and to others. Lazarus' joy overflowed in basking in the presence of Jesus and apparently in sharing with other people about Jesus as the chief priest decided to put him to death, also because he was spreading the word about Jesus. And it's interesting to me that that's the conclusion they came to. Like, let's put Lazarus to death. I mean, wouldn't Jesus just raise him from the dead again? It's amazing when we are not close to Jesus, when we are not led by his Spirit how ridiculous our thoughts can be and how stupid the decisions we make can be. And of course with Mary, Mary's wonder and thankfulness overflowed in a lavish demonstration of sacrifice of this very expensive family heirloom. What is our gratitude for Jesus overflowing into in our lives? It is a beautiful thing when the worth of Jesus and the love of his followers match. Let's look at Mark's account. In Mark 14, verse 4, we're told, some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. Look at the criticism Mary was facing. It wasn't just Judas, like John's account said. Many people were kind of privately amongst each other criticizing her. They were indignant. It says they rebuked her harshly. They said, "What a waste!" Some people look at being sold out to Jesus that way. What a waste. What a waste of your education. What a waste of your time, your energy. What a waste of your life. That was the attitude. And I know many of you have faced that as well. This is done. People are praised for their devotion to education or for their devotion to the military or for their devotion to a career. But when it's toward Jesus, not as celebrated in a lot of cases. And in Mary's case, this gift that she gave, it wasn't just the cost of the gift, but it was the way she presented it. We're told that she poured it on his head and his feet in Mark, and then in John emphasizes his feet because John says she wiped his feet with her hair. Just try to visualize the image of what's going on. The way she presented this showed incredible humility, gratitude, wholeheartedness. Half-heartedness toward Jesus would never and will never produce this kind of devotion. And the thing with Mary is that this was not out of character for her. Let's look at a previous example in her life with Jesus back in Luke chapter 10. In verse 38, we're told, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her." Earlier when she first meets Jesus, we see that she's at his feet. And of course, in this example, she's listening to him. As much time as Mary spent at Jesus' feet, it appears she had a very sober view of herself. She was humble. She was grateful. She was desperate. She was dependent on him. And it showed by her choosing what is better. Most of us, our lives are very busy, even at times with things that would be considered good things. We might like being around Jesus, but are we sitting at his feet? Are we listening to him? 2020 has definitely been the most unique year of my lifetime so far. And with it has come challenges besides just being busy to being sold out for Jesus. Frankly, there's not been as much opportunity to meet together with other Christians, which really is a big part of following Jesus. We have 59 different one another passages in the New Testament we're given to obey. This year has been more difficult to evangelize, especially when it comes to meeting and engaging new people. It's been more difficult to be hospitable. People don't want to come in your home, and a lot of time maybe they shouldn't. Worship online like this, it is harder to actually engage. And what I've heard and seen in many is that a dullness spiritually is settling in from having to engage in these different ways. I see it in a lack of engagement, even on worship streams like this, of just greeting one another in the comments, of putting a service like this off till later. Sometimes there's a good reason, but other times is it really just because we've subtly started to prioritize other things instead of our worship of God and our study of His Word? Frankly, in the Fort Collins Christian Church, we've seen less engagement at our midweek gatherings as the months have progressed in dealing with COVID. And as well, our financial giving has dwindled throughout the months. Many of us were experiencing anxiety or discouragement or even anger over COVID and the racial tensions going on in our country. And it seems like a lot of us are just biding time until things get back to normal, and we're doing it with hobbies, we're doing it with Netflix or social media. And as a shepherd of God's people here in the Fort Collins Christian Church, my fear is that for many of us, Jesus couldn't say that we've chosen what is better during these times. Consider statistics from the Barna Research Group. And these studies were done before COVID, but consider these and then evaluate them for yourself. In a Barna study, they found out that those who consider themselves Christians actually are spending 7 times as much time on entertainment as they do on spiritual activities. That's before COVID. Has that even increased during COVID? In the study, they listed 14 life goals for people to have over the next 10 years. And this was done for people between 18 and 35 years old who consider themselves Christians. And as they ranked these life goals in the order of importance to them, becoming more mature spiritually ranked 12th of the 14 options, trailing such things as buying a home, getting married, and following my dreams. Now, is buying a home, getting married, or following our dreams necessarily bad? No. But if they are listed in priority above being close to God and growing spiritually, or if they're getting in the way of even getting right with God, there is a problem. Okay, that's a Barna study. What about you? What about me? Are we choosing what is better? What is taking priority in our lives over the last few months? Are we giving Jesus our undivided attention and learning from Him, or is He being squeezed out by more important matters? Is discipleship being neglected in our lives? What about service toward others? Or looking for opportunities, even if they're scarce, to share the gospel with people? Are we offering a devotion that costs all we have because we believe in our heart of hearts Jesus is worth it? We've got to fight for these things right now because they're not coming easy to us. But nothing and no one will give us peace and hope in our soul like Jesus if we will position ourselves appropriately at His feet in humility, gratitude, and dependence, ready to learn from Him, ready to serve Him and His purposes. And in Mary, we see such extravagance in her gift because ultimately nothing but complete devotion was acceptable because Jesus was worth all she had to give. Again, in Mark's account in verse 6, after they rebuke her harshly, it says, "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Wow! Jesus says she has done a beautiful thing to me. And he highlights she did what she could. For us this week, what can we do this week? We already know what we can't do. We're masters of that through COVID. But what can we do? Could we have a special prayer time to draw near to Jesus? Maybe that's alone. Maybe that's with someone else. What brother or sister in Christ can you encourage this week? There are creative ways. It could be just a thoughtful text that is sent, or a phone call to check in on someone perhaps you haven't talked to in a while. Maybe it's just going over to someone's house if they agree to have a conversation in the driveway, keep the distance from each other, being outside. Maybe it's grabbing a meal to meet in a park together and have a meal together and catch up. Maybe it's just a small gift for someone as a gesture that can just be dropped off by their front door. What can we do? It is harder evangelistically, but are we at least praying for open doors from God of opportunity? Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a neighbor. But we see in this passage in verse 9 how Jesus feels about those who are sold out. He says, man, wherever the gospel is preached, what she has done would be told. Being sold out for him, he says, is worthy of being recorded in the Holy Scriptures. The question for us, are we sold out? Second question, or are we a sellout? While Mark's account tells us that many spoke privately amongst each other, criticizing Mary, John tells us it was Judas who actually spoke up. And why did he do it? We're told because of greed, because of selfishness. It wasn't a concern for the poor. That was a mask. In John 13, it's clear that none of the disciples knew he was stealing. They didn't know that till later, and that's why John records it in his gospel. And this is where we begin to learn how Judas, became the historical Judas. Three brief things I want us to look at because we need to be wise in learning from this cautionary tale about Judas. First one, he wasn't open. Not being open with his sin led him to the place he ended up. See, Satan messes up our hearts with sin. And if we don't deal with it like the cancer that it is, it grows and makes itself at home in our lives. This will oftentimes lead to a place of criticalness toward others, like it did with Judas. We're all susceptible to this. So if you find yourself battling with criticalness toward others, I implore, look inside. See if there's anything you're not being open with, any attitudes you haven't repented of, any arrogance that needs to be repented of. And admittedly, it is harder during the social distancing to be open, but we will find a way, and we must find a way if we understand the dire importance of keeping our hearts pure. Brothers and sisters, make it happen if it needs to happen. The second thing we see with Judas is he made demands of Jesus. He says, why are you allowing this waste, Jesus? Instead of being at Jesus' feet like Mary in dependence of him and learning from him, Judas wanted Jesus at his feet, taking direction from him. Are you, or have you become, or at times are you a demanding follower of Jesus? We can stop following him because we want him to lead us in the way we want him to lead us, or we want to lead him in the way we think he should go. If we are followers of Jesus, there was a time we gave up everything to follow him because we were desperate, unworthy. But at some point, Satan can begin to convince us that we deserve some of that back, and we begin to demand things from God. Maybe things don't turn out the way we hope, so we start to withhold our hearts, withhold our time from God and his purposes. Faith dwindles, trust disappears. We want to see the fulfillment of God's promises now. And if he won't make it happen, we will try something else besides Jesus' teachings. Or maybe we find out that Jesus' church has flaws, so we grow discouraged or cynical or both and pull back our hearts. Well, surprise, we are the church, so of course it has flaws because we are flawed. If we find ourselves in this place spiritually, the solution will always be the same as it was at the beginning of our journey. We need to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him humbly instead of making demands of him. Third thing we find with Judas is he hated correction. We see in both Mark and John that Jesus corrected the thinking of Judas and the others who were criticizing Mary. And how did Judas respond to that correction? Well, if we know the story as it goes forward, and if you don't, come back as we study John 13 in a couple of weeks. Instead, how he responded, rather than repenting when he was corrected, he went on to sell out Jesus to Jesus's enemies. How do we take correction? You can do a study on your own. It's a great study from the book of Proverbs. But for the sake of time here, I'm going to give a brief summary of what God says in the Proverbs will happen if we hate correction. We will lead others astray. That's Proverbs 10:17. We will be disgraced. That's Proverbs 11:2. Our plans will fail. Proverbs 15:22. We're told we're stupid if we ignore correction in Proverbs 12:1. And we're told we will die in Proverbs 14, verse 12. In Matthew's account, we're told how much it actually took for Judas to sell out Jesus. It was 30 pieces of silver. That would have been equal to about 100 denarii in that time. In other words, a third of the cost of the perfume that Mary poured out. Ironically, this is the same amount an owner of an ox would have had to pay if his ox gored a slave, according to Exodus chapter 21. So the enemies of Jesus, who were plotting to kill Jesus, found a friend in Judas, and Judas was willing to sell Jesus out for the price of a Jewish slave. This revealed what Jesus was worth to Judas. What is Jesus worth to you? What is Jesus worth to me? And we have to ask the tough question, have we been a sellout at times? What would it take for us to be a sellout? Would a raise at work get us to sell out Jesus? Maybe a girl or guy who's interested in us and doesn't really care about Jesus. Is it popularity that would get us to sell out? Is it comfort? Is it some form of success? Or is it maybe even a pandemic getting us to compromise slowly until there is not much evidence of devotion to Jesus and his purposes in our lives? See, Satan tells us these things are not a big deal, but they are, because these things reveal what Jesus is worth to us. Judas is a cautionary tale. He never recovered. Although he was seized with remorse when Jesus was condemned to death, and even upon returning the 30 silver coins he had sold Jesus out for, he never repented and ended up committing suicide. Brothers and sisters, may none of us be on the Judas path. And we can help not being on that path by being open with our lives, by following Jesus instead of trying to lead him, and by loving correction in our lives. These things will help prevent us from being sellouts. As we conclude, in this section we've seen two different people who are historic. Mary and Judas. Both of them have gone down in history for very different reasons, and it really proves true the quote from really one of my favorite movies, Gladiator, that says, "What we do in life echoes for eternity." What is Jesus worth to you? What is Jesus worth to me? Will we be sold out for him? Or will we sell him out? It's shown and revealed by what we give to him, and it's shown by what Satan can use to drag us away from him. Brothers and sisters, if there is any voice telling you to moderate your love for Jesus, do not listen to that voice. But may we swim in his love today and put our hope in the fact that today is short and it may have troubles, but eternity is forever and promised to those who are sold out to him. We don't deserve Jesus. We don't deserve heaven. But because of his grace shown through Christ on the cross, even though we don't deserve him, we are still recipients of these unimaginable gifts.